On behalf of the Tarrant County Black Historical and Genealogical Society, welcome to the final program of today presented by the Genealogical Society. Today we're presenting, with the help of Mr. Bob Ray Sanders and Ms. Jan Jones, a live documentary. So you're participating in a live documentary in a one-act play on Broadway. So the city is up there today. All right? So get in the mood as we tell the story of that intimate history of the first black millionaire in Texas who lived right here in Fort Worth, in Terrell Heights. He made and had an impact in the community, in his home life, in the religious circles that he traveled in politics, business, and charity. Now picture yourself during the time of slavery, segregation, civil rights, Voting Rights Act, the Great Depression. Just keep yourself in that mode and listen as Jan tells the story, Bob Ray asks questions. As we go on this adventure, we call it a historical adventure, in the amazing life of Bill Gooseneck McDonald. Thank you.
How's everybody doing?
All right.
All right. We're gonna have a good time tonight?
All right.
Today? And listen, I'm not gonna hog this show. We're gonna get to your questions too as quickly as possible. But I'm gonna start out with Jan, just to give us a little perspective.
One of the things that I wanted to emphasize in beginning this story is the impact that William McDonald, better known in many circles as Gooseneck Bill, the impact that he had on Fort Worth, which unfortunately has vanished for the most part. At one time, if you walked or rode along 9th Street and 1st Street and Jones, there were many buildings there that William McDonald either built or had a hand in building. And I just had a couple of slides. The building in the upper left-hand corner is the home he built in Terrell Heights, which was torn down approximately in 1952, and a modern home took its place. And then behind, to the right is the Prince Hall Masonic Temple, which was a beautiful building at the corner of 9th and Jones. At some point, it too was torn down. And then at the bottom, and unfortunately this is not a good photo because it comes out of a book that was published by the Prince Hall Masons in 1929, is the Masonic Mosque, which was finally torn down, I believe, maybe in the 1980s, and the temple was moved over on Martin Luther King Freeway.
And that was where, Jan, this was off of East 4th Street.
Yes, yes. And this one was an enormous building built in the shape of a cross. Each of the wings, it had 4 wings, was 90 feet. One wing was 120 feet. And I remember as a young girl frequently driving past this and asking my parents, what is that building? I thought it was the most amazing building in Fort Worth. And they didn't know. They didn't know, which is typical of the 1950s and 60s in Fort Worth. And then he also built the Masonic printing plant. He built the Gym Hotel. There was also the McDonald office building. His own family tore down the office building, probably from what I've read, for more parking for the temple. But all of these buildings have vanished, unfortunately. They are his legacy. What we have today, unfortunately, remains only in Old Trinity Cemetery. the monument that he put up in 1920 to his son, William McDonald Jr., who unfortunately died very tragically at age 19 and did not live to fulfill his father's dreams for him. So with that introduction, just so you understand a little about what Bill McDonald contributed to this city, which is now all vanished, I will turn it back over to Bob Ray and we can go from there.
Okay, we're just gonna have a discussion, and as I said, we're just gonna do it, and Jan mentioned 9th Street, Jones, all that. People who are not from here, or people who may are from here and don't remember the 50s and 60s, I mean, there were blocks and blocks of black-owned businesses, all the way down Jones, around 9th, Calhoun. And correct me if I'm wrong, there may be only one block, and it's not even a block, left that is black-owned, and that's a church in downtown Fort Worth. And that's gone. But let me ask you, Jan, how did you come to know Bill McDonald? How did you even get interested? You, of all people, and I say you of all people, because let's face it, I think she's white. And,
Yeah.
but how did you come to know him?
It's an interesting story, to me anyway. Bill McDonald owned a hotel called the Gym, which was probably, during the years of segregation and Jim Crow, was probably the best place in Fort Worth for African Americans coming through town that needed a place to stay. Well, back in the 90s and the 2000s, I was working on a theatrical history of Fort Worth. And I knew who Gooseneck Bill was, but someone said, oh yes, Gooseneck Bill had a nightclub. So I went, oh, okay, well, I had a section in my book that was sort of on some of these clubs that had been around Fort Worth, the significant clubs. And so I started investigating that. But what I found, well, I found two things. First of all, William McDonald was a very conservative individual. He would never probably have even set foot in a nightclub. But what he did, he leased space in the Gym Hotel, and the Cooper brothers ran this annex to the Gym Hotel as a jazz club, and the club itself became so popular that white musicians were coming over from Dallas when they had gigs over there to sit in at the
Late night sessions.
Yes, all night sessions. But Bill McDonald had nothing to do with it, and eventually he actually sold the building to the Cooper brothers, and they were the ones who kept that club going. Bill McDonald was very conservative. He was a prohibitionist most of his life, so he would never have been involved in anything like that. He probably would have thought it was sort of racy. But anyway, that is where, while I was doing this research, trying to discover his connections to this club, that I started uncovering all of his other accomplishments, and I was floored. I was floored. I had no idea. I think I knew that he was the president of the Fraternal Bank and Trust, but I had no idea that he was the political power that he was from the 1890s through approximately 1928, when he became so disgusted with the Republican Party and with politics in general that he quit.
Let's come back.
Okay, all right, we won't say any more. But anyway, that's my story.
That's a good tease, because there are a lot of people upset with the Republican Party today.
Yes.
And the Democratic Party.
Yes.
But for those of you who may not know, the Cooper brothers were the uncle and father of Lionel Cooper,
Yes,
that many of us
who just
knew.
passed away.
Yeah,
2 or 3 years
just
ago,
a couple
wasn't it?
years ago, right. So Lionel was one of the first black police officers here, went on to become a constable and a lot of other things, was shot while on duty, and of all things was taken to St. Joseph Hospital, where they would not assign him a physician until some black doctors arrived. So that's another whole
Yeah.
story. But before we talk more about Gooseneck, do we know much about his parents?
I have done a lot of research into his parents, and in fact, right now, I have a lady, a genealogist, looking for me in Noxubee County, Mississippi for more. His father was born in the area around Nashville, Tennessee. You see various birth dates for him, 1826, 1827, as late as 1832. His tombstone says 1827, George McDonald. George McDonald was sold at some point from the Upper South, which was a common practice, to slave traders, and the one he was sold to happened to be Nathan Bedford Forrest, the most notorious slave trader in the South, and who went on to be a cavalry officer in the Civil War of some infamy. From there, George McDonald was sold to a family in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. All we know about them for certain, and that's what I'm still trying to track down, is that their name was Martin. At some point, while he was living in Tuscaloosa County, he met Flora Scott, who was also a slave of this same family. They got married. They had at least one child before the Civil War who did not survive. Her name was Ruth. Then at some point, well, and actually, if it's the Wrights Martin family that I have found, the patriarch of the family died in about 1857. And what I believe happened is that they were taken to Mississippi because the entire family migrated there. What I believe happened, and what I'm trying to prove happened, is that many of the slaves were dispersed. They were sold at auction. What I do know now, and which I have discovered, is that they ended up in Carroll Parish, Louisiana. I actually found the slave deed with both of their names on it together, George and Flora. Of course, slave deeds do not have last names in common practice. This family, when Ulysses S. Grant invaded the upper Mississippi, trying to find a way around Vicksburg in 1862-63, this family, whose name was also Martin, fled to Texas, and they brought their slaves with them. And I have found the deeds in Kaufman County where Mary Martin, not Peter Pan, bought land in 1862. And so we know that they probably came with her and her extended family to there. And now by 1870, George McDonald and Flora have moved on. They are no longer with them.
Yeah, before you go there now.
Okay, what am I? Oh, well, I guess we ought to tell about Bill being born.
Yeah, when was he born?
He was born.
Because he was born in Kaufman County, right?
He was born in Kaufman County, a little town northeast of Kaufman called College Mound. There is a cemetery still there, a white cemetery. The black cemetery, I'm not sure if they even know where its location is. On June 22nd, 1866,
Now, keep in mind that date, folks, June 22nd, 1866. That was almost exactly a year.
Exactly a year and 2 days
After-
after
Go ahead.
word of the emancipation of the slaves finally reached Texas on June 19, 1865. So, in some ways, his birth was momentous, or at least I think it's momentous. Go ahead.
No, yeah, and you were
Well-
going up to 1870.
Okay, well, let's back up a little bit, because the family to me is fascinating, and I think that forms his character.
Was he
Okay?
the only child, first of all?
No, he was not. He had a sister, an older sister, who had been born a slave, Amelia. She was about 4 years older. After the war, he had another sister, Emma, who was born in 1867, about a year after he was born. Then there was a third child, Erlene, and there's no way to prove this, but I believe that probably Erlene's birth led to the death of Bill's mother, because she died sometime in 1870, and this would have been about the time Erlene was born also. So many women, white and black, during this time period did not survive childbirth. So there's a very good possibility that's what caused her death. But what this family endured following Flora's death is just, Bill McDonald's first biographer, William Bundy, hints at this from the things that Bill McDonald told him about what they went through. There was a time period where George McDonald was desperately, like any single father would be, trying to support his children, but he is doing it alone. He found work with a cattleman who was driving cattle to Shreveport, which I was going, Shreveport? But I found out that was a fairly common practice in East Texas at the time. And he left his children in the care of people he believed he could trust somewhere in the College Mound area. But something happened that was very traumatic. What we know is that Amelia was frequently beaten by these people and ended up having to defend her younger siblings. Erlene, the infant, for whatever reason, whether it was just she was a very small infant or if there was child abuse involved, no one knows, but Erlene died. And finally, George McDonald realized that to get the family out of this situation, he was going to have to find more stable work. And so he, in 1871, the end of 1871, married Isabel Bell Crouch. And from then on, and Bell also had a child who was probably the child of a white man named Alf. And Bell stayed at home from then on with the kids while George made the living. And they eventually moved into Kaufman from College Mound because one of his skills was blacksmithing, and he felt he could get a job in Kaufman as a blacksmith.
Now, he did go to school, right? I mean, by this time we had some public schools.
Yes. Well, probably, in fact, I know that the first school he went to was not a public school, because right in the period of Reconstruction, most of the schools were being operated by religious societies
Right.
who came into the South. They came all over the South in an effort to provide schooling for, well, there were 4 million slaves set free, and most of them could not read and write. So there would be very often day classes for children, night classes for adults, And the term Sunday school, which we have grown up with in the South, actually came out of the Reconstruction idea because they would hold school on Sunday for adults who otherwise during the week had to work. And this is where Bill McDonald got his first education, is with one of the teachers that were hired from the north somewhere. He had a teacher that he remembered was from Missouri. And the name that I have seen has been written Todworth and Todsworth. I've seen it several different ways, but I've never been able to find this actual young man, whoever he was, on any records. But I have found records of other of the teachers, so I know that this is how he got his education at first.
At first, but he would eventually graduate from high school.
Yes. He eventually, the Texas public school system had a hard time getting going in the 1870s and 1880s because for a long time.
Oh my goodness, that's still happening. Isn't it?
Yeah. The state of Texas, our wonderful legislators had this habit. I mean, they designated a state school fund sometime in the 1850s, but they kept appropriating it for other work because many white families simply educated their children at home or sent them to private schools. That was the way schooling was done. And many white families resisted public education at first. So, but by the time Bill comes along in the late 1870s and 1880s, there is a black public school in Kaufman, and that's where he gets his education. The main administrator and teacher of this was a gentleman named Lewis Foster, who became McDonald's probably earliest mentor, along with a white man named Z.T. Adams, Zachary Taylor Adams.
He was a rancher and lawyer.
He was a rancher and attorney, and the stories that you hear say that Adams, he hired Bill at first when he was a kid, probably about 10 or 12 years old, to herd cattle because Bill had learned to ride. So he was out there herding cattle. But he began to realize that this kid was smart. And so at first he moved him into the house as a house servant, which was very common. But then he realized this kid is really smart, and he would take him into town with him, and he became sort of a junior law clerk, running errands for various attorneys, actually trained him. You know, all lawyers at this time in Texas
Don't they take another sip?
read the law.
Right.
They would find an attorney and they would read the law with them. And that's the way they learned. Bill McDonald read the law with Z.T. Adams for at least 3 years that we know of. And there is no telling what might have happened if a very unfortunate incident had not occurred. Z.T. Adams was just about 38 or 39 years old, and he had a stroke, and he died. Bill McDonald, in the meantime, had graduated from high school, and he made his first trip to Fort Worth. I think a lot of people think he arrived in Fort Worth about 1907, but that's not true. He arrived in Fort Worth in 1885.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And he got a job with some Jewish tailors whose last name was Swartz, not the photographers.
Well, is this before he goes to college?
Yes.
Yeah.
And he worked here for probably about a year. And then, now there is no way to prove this without family papers of some sort, but I think what he was doing was trying to save up enough money to go to college. Well, in the meantime, Z.T. Adams died, and I think what happened at that point was maybe he had left a legacy for him or something, but it is in the fall of 1886 that Bill McDonald finally heads to Nashville, Tennessee, once again, to Roger Williams University, where he intended to get his college degree. Unfortunately, once again, something happened that was out of his control. But as we talk about his personality, you will understand that he would never have put up with this. He arrived at Roger Williams in the fall of 1886 sometime, and there was a big controversy that erupted on the campus that late fall, and it lasted into the spring, or actually into early winter. It involved two of the white officials who were accused, anyway, of double charging these black kids who made up the entire student body. This was a black academy and university.
But controlled by whites.
But controlled by whites of the American Baptist Home Mission Society. And
Good
the
Baptist.
students rebelled. Not surprisingly, they rebelled. And depending on which newspaper article you see, between 100 and 130 of them just walked away. They said, we are not putting up with this. The American Baptist Home Mission Society did not support them like they should have. They supported the white officials. Now, several months later, they finally sanctioned these two men and fired them. But what I think happened, given Bill McDonald's, what would later reveal itself, he was not a patient man as he grew older. He put people on the spot. He was not afraid to put people on the spot. He spoke straight with them. He got angry with them. One of his most outstanding characteristics that I've seen people mention more than once, he would not lay down, which is a reference to the common practice in the South of, a black person stepping to the side on the sidewalk to let a white person pass. He had none of that. And over the years, over the decades, that trait of his became so well known that whites and blacks treated him very differently than the average person.
Well, I want to get into Fort Worth here in a minute
Okay.
permanently, but let's go back just a bit. The name, his full name was William Madison
Yes.
McDonald.
Mhm.
You know how he got that name? Or what
Well, the story is that Bundy told, that I presume McDonald told him, because it's pretty obvious when you read Bundy's biography that he and Bill were sitting probably in Bill McDonald's house, and he was taking notes as McDonald talked. But the story that Bill McDonald told was that the old master, whoever that may have been, gave him the name Madison, William Madison, because this family was somehow connected to James Madison, the former president of the United States. The William part, and this was a large extended Martin family, the William part came from one of the young ladies in this family who liked William Shakespeare. And so his name became William Madison. And then, for my white people in the audience, you may not realize that before the war and before emancipation, most blacks did not have last names. And after emancipation, some of them chose names. Very often those names were from a previous owner. George McDonald, we know of nobody in his background named McDonald. So chances are he just liked the name McDonald, and that's why he picked the name McDonald.
And of course, many slaves took the names of ex-presidents.
Right.
Anyway.
Right. There are so
Washington,
many.
Jefferson.
Yeah, there are so many George Washingtons and Thomas Jeffersons out there. It's wonderful to read the old census
But how many
reports.
people out there knew that William Madison had come from Shakespeare and Madison, the president? I mean,
It's interesting. Well, there's one little catch to this story, and it's not really a catch because the Martin family, when they fled to Texas, would have brought all of their relatives and all of their slaves who could possibly get here. The patriarch of the family was a man named John H. Martin, and I just recently discovered some legal papers that revealed that he died in 1862, which was 4 years before Bill McDonald was born. So it was somebody else in this Martin family that saw the connection and wanted to name or got Flora and George to agree to the name.
Okay, after college, he did, well, not teach school, but he was principal of the school for a while. Am I right about that?
Yes, he was,
In-
well, he
in
was
college?
actually, yeah, this is interesting because most schools, white or black, were one-room schools. So he was an administrator, but he was also a teacher. I think, and I've tried to figure this out, I've been to Austin several times to read Texas school records. And the best I can figure is that administrators had the additional responsibility of traveling around to these different one-room schools to make sure everything was being taught the way it should. And at the grand old age of 18, he was already out there teaching and serving as an administrator, which he only did briefly, at least the first go-round. Then he came to Fort Worth for a while. Then he went to college, gave up on that. I shouldn't say give up, but he just
Left.
did not go back. And then he came back to Kaufman County and resumed his teaching career. Well, okay, back up. He came back to Fort Worth in 1887, where there was a movement going on to create the first African-American state fair. And he and several of his fraternal brothers got together. These were mostly young men who were ambitious, and they started the Lone Star Colored State Fair Association. And it was held here in 1887, the first colored state fair
How many people
in the
knew that?
state.
I didn't know that. Go ahead.
And then in 1888, they got the idea that the state fair might be better located away from the Dallas State Fair because there were complaints that it was sort of stealing the thunder. So they decided the corner of Texas where Louisiana, Texas, Arkansas, and Oklahoma came together would be a better location, and they moved the state fair the second year to Marshall. Unfortunately, and by then Bill McDonald was the superintendent and president of the State Fair Association. And one interesting thing I've got to tell here, he tried to get Frederick Douglass to come and speak. I found the correspondence, at least on McDonald's side. Frederick Douglass, unfortunately, did not reply and did not come. But I just thought that was amazing that he tried to get Frederick Douglass to come and speak. But the State Fair Association fell apart, and in 1889 then he returned to Kaufman County and resumed his teaching career.
So when did he finally come to Fort Worth for good? To start his businesses, to get
Okay.
going?
There was a movement in the Prince Hall Masonic State Lodge because
This is the Black Masons,
yes,
right?
the Black Masons. There was a movement that began around 1906, 1907 to find a permanent location that they could hold what was called their grand proceedings every summer. But before that, they had moved, they'd move around to major cities around the country, around Texas. And that is what brought Bill McDonald here in the Grand Lodge moved here in 1907, which is the same year they built the Masonic Temple, which was at 9th and Jones. Bill McDonald moved here sometime in late 1907 or early 1908. And he actually roomed with a gentleman whose name I can't remember right now, but he was a grocer. And this gentleman owned the grocery store that went into the new Masonic Temple that first year. And so in 1908, in the city directory, Bill McDonald is rooming with him. And then a couple of years later, he evidently finally brings his family over from Kaufman. By then he has a wife, his second wife, Mattie Helen Ezell McDonald, and his son, William Jr., who was born in 1898. I think part of the reason why the family may have delayed was because both of his parents, his dad and his stepmother, were quite elderly, and they died within a year of each other in 1904 and 1905. And then he had considerable property, so I think part of the reason that maybe they delayed a little bit, they just needed time to get their family affairs in order. But by about 1909, they are living over on Terrell, but in a different house. And the house was pre-existing. I know that he did not build it. The house was already there. Then around 1911, he built the house at the corner, 1201 East Terrell, that wonderful mansion which remained a landmark in Fort Worth for so many decades.
Now, when did he establish the bank, or when did the...
Well, the bank did not come along until 1912, January 1st, 1912. But it moved into the bottom floor of the temple was devoted to rental space, lease space. And so the bank went into one of those spaces. The second floor was offices. Third floor was a ballroom auditorium. But 1912 was when the bank was established.
Now, where does a man coming from Kaufman County to Fort Worth, who also happens to be black, even though he's educated, where does he get the money to start a bank in a major city in Texas?
Okay, now we have to get into politics.
That's where we're going.
Edward Howland Robinson Green, E.H.R. Green. It's a mouthful, any way you say it. Most of his friends called him Ned. He was in fact, he and Bill McDonald were just 2 years apart in age. So they had a lot in common. Ned Green was the son of Hetty Green. Hetty Green was a financier, very unusual. She was they were fondly called in the 1890s the robber barons. She was one of these extremely wealthy people, such as the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, but she had made all of her money Part of it she inherited, part of it, she's a very shrewd businesswoman. But she sent her son Ned to Texas and told him that he was going to take over a railroad that she had bought, and he was going, this was basically a learning process. He was 24 when he got here. And she told him his job was to get this railroad up and running again. Now, he came in close to the end of the year in 1892, but he didn't meet Bill until 1896 of January. And their first meeting did not go well, I might say, because Ned Green, although he wasn't from the Southern tradition, he wasn't used to blacks keeping their place. But he was, because he was wealthy, used to ordering people around. So he basically walked into a meeting of the Republican leaders in Coffman County.
Of which Bill was one of them.
Bill was he was the chairman at that point of the 9th Senatorial District, which is, Senate districts are who decide who's going to the state legislature. So anyway, Bill's a powerful guy in a small pond. And Ned Green said, I want to go to the National Republican Convention. And Bill McDonald said, you can't do that. We've already got, each district was allowed 2 delegates. And actually, these are the congressional districts that pick delegates.
Right.
Each district got 2. Bill was one, and a guy named Gannon was the other. And he said, you can't go. We've already got our people picked. And Ned Green says, I want to go. My mother told me that I needed to get publicity for the railroad, and this is the best way I know to get publicity. Well, they argued a lot, and eventually, Bill McDonald walked out of the room. He goes, you're not going, and he walked out. But a few days later, when they had the Coffman County Convention, Ned Green, who at this point was living in Dallas, brought something like 1,200 to 2,000 people from Dallas down to the convention, intent on taking it over and getting his way anyway. Well, Gannon, the other candidate or delegate, Bill McDonald later said he was twirling like a leaf. He was so scared. And he said, listen, I'm backing out of this. I will not go. If Green wants to be the delegate, we'll let him. So Bill McDonald, famous story, said, okay, you can go, but you'll have to pay this guy's expenses. And Green got out his checkbook, and he said, okay, what were the expenses? And Bill said $75. Green wrote out a check, and he handed it to McDonald. It was for $7,500. And Bill looked at it and went, I said 75, not 7,500. And gave him tore the check up. But anyway, Ned Green got his way, and I don't think Bill McDonald was too happy about it at that point, but they became friends. Now, here's how he got his money. Politics all over the United States, and it certainly wasn't Republican, it wasn't Democrat, this was the way business was done. The job of politics is to elect your candidate, right? Your presidential candidate. And in the 1800s and on into the 1900s, once your candidate won, you got to take part in the spoils if you helped get this candidate elected in your state. And the spoils were federal jobs. Jobs like court clerks, postmasters, tax collectors. All of these were jobs that were appointive. And Bill McDonald and Ned Green Eventually, after they became friends, they formed an alliance, and Ned Green's money didn't hurt this alliance. They essentially controlled the doling out of federal jobs to various people. And there would be hundreds of these jobs in any given state. Any person that won an appointment had to pay a certain percentage back to whoever helped them get the appointment.
Called kickback.
Yeah. It was perfectly legal at this point, and it stayed legal for another decade. But that is where Bill McDonald got his money, because you can, in 1896, when the Republican candidate wins the presidency, all of a sudden in Kaufman County, Bill McDonald starts buying land. He bought his one of the most touching things I found. He bought his father, who had never owned anything. The first thing he bought his father a house and land. That got to me when I saw that.
Okay, but now when you come to the bank's establishment, there were a lot of these fraternal organizations, these amazing
Yes.
groups all over the state.
And in 1906, they reached an agreement to put in money and consolidate, first of all, to have the state lodge, sort of, the Grand Lodge in this one building. And they also all put in money into the bank. But keep in mind, well, in 1937, Ned Green died in 1936. And Ned Green and his mother both were famous for avoiding the tax man. They used any ploy possible to avoid paying taxes. Well, a federal panel estate judges were appointed by the Supreme Court of the United States to travel around and try to figure out where Ned Green's money was. Bill McDonald was one of the chief witnesses in these hearings that went on for months all over the United States. He testified that over the years that he and Ned Green worked together, that he had made between $300,000 and $400,000 from the dispensing of federal patronage jobs. Now that was over a decade, but it's quite clear he wasn't just spending the money, he was investing it in land, in whatever.
And black entrepreneurship.
Yes.
Was he
Yes.
encouraging black businesses throughout?
And he also testified before this federal panel. They said, what is your connection to the Fraternal Bank and Trust? And he said, I own it, lock, stock, and barrel. So it was Bill McDonald's bank from the day it opened, which means that he would have had to have had 51%, let's figure, at least.
How big in terms of deposits was this bank? I mean,
Well, it started out with about $100,000. By the time
in 1907.
1912.
1912.
By 1929, right before the stock market crash, it had deposits of around $500,000 because over, 17 years, the people of the state, of the various African American fraternal orders had learned this is a trustworthy bank. And so it had become one of the chief depositories in the state for all of the fraternal organizations.
But how did it, of all the banks in the country, and particularly in Texas, survive the Depression when
Well,
others were going under?
that's an interesting story too. We don't know this entirely, how it survived, except that Bill McDonald was a very, very conservative, shrewd banker. He was conservative. He didn't make risky loans. In fact, he didn't loan to anybody outside of the fraternal orders that had invested in the bank. However, he made one miscalculation, which he admitted. He had placed something, a little over $200,000 in the Texas State Bank. And in 1930, that bank collapsed because these white bankers did practice risky investments, and that bank collapsed.
So that's $200,000 gone.
$200,000 gone. Bill McDonald paid all of these people off whose money he had lost from his personal fortune. Now, you know, the question always comes about, was Bill McDonald a millionaire? It's because of that incident that we will probably never know what his personal worth was before the crash hit. But he had the integrity, the incredible integrity, to make sure that all of these, and most of them were small depositors, but he made sure they all got their money, and he paid it out of his personal fortune. When he died, the probate records estimated his personal worth in 1950 at around $350,000. So he had built it back up over 20 years, but it was clear, you know, that a lot of it was gone.
Jim, before we go to the audience, let's go back a little bit to the Republican Party. He became leader of the Republican Party. There was a group called the Black Tans.
The Black and Tans were the faction or wing that were chiefly African American, with a few loyal whites who believed that the party of Lincoln should maintain the principles of Lincoln. And then there were the Lily Whites, who were the white supremacists.
Who would eventually take over the party. Right?
Yes, but it's interesting. As long as Bill McDonald was around, they did not, and I should give some due to his predecessor, Norris Wright Cuney. Norris Wright Cuney, from the mid-1880s until his death in 1898, held the Lily Whites off. In fact, Cuney was the one who coined the word Lily White. But then Bill McDonald sort of took up the mantle after Cuney's death, and what essentially the Lily Whites had to do, they had to form a separate Republican Party. They were aided and abetted in this by the early 1900s by the Republican National Committee, who all through the 1890s had upheld the Lincoln principles, you know, that we will all be Republicans only. But that changed in the early 1900s. The Republican Party, or the National Committee, eventually recognized the Lily White Party, and through the Black Party, the remnants that were left out of the convention.
And the Lily White Party began to come up with poll taxes and other things to suppress the black vote.
The Terrell election laws came in, which were devastating well, it would be like the fights nowadays over redistricting, where very often the redistricting occurs over racial lines. And the Terrell election laws sort of created the same problem in the early 1900s by essentially taking the power of the blacks in their home counties away from them. The power went to the Texas Republican Executive Committee.
I think I read somewhere where, there was one year where like 100,000 black voters.
Yes.
And after this Millionaire
Yes.
White Party came
Yeah.
back, the next time there were 5,000.
Yeah, well,
compared.
the irony of it was that all through, well, from the end of the Civil War, the Republican Party in Texas was 90% African American.
I mean, I think that's surprising to a lot of
90%,
people.
and the 10% were trying to tell them, you have no part in this party. And they gradually got stronger and stronger.
And again, it was a party of Lincoln, the guy that freed
Right.
the slaves. But, and Bill McDonald did sort of withdraw from the Republican Party for a while and
Oh,
voted
yeah,
Democrat.
well, in 1897 and 1898, he got very angry, but it was over the Republican Party wanted to fuse with the People's Party. And Bill McDonald publicly called the People's Party white trash. That was his assessment of them. And Ned Green, who Bill McDonald had helped get elected the chairman of the Texas State Republican Committee. Ned Green went along with fusion, as it was called, and Bill McDonald resigned. And he didn't come back for probably a year and a half.
Yeah, he ended up voting for Al Smith and FDR.
Oh, yeah, well, now that came in 1928,
Yeah.
when he said, I'm not even going to vote Republican anymore. And the thing that guided his voting all through, I mean, the candidates he supported were always the people that he believed who supported African American interests. He believed, for instance, and I'll end with this, he was friendly to Theodore Roosevelt because Theodore Roosevelt had sort of indicated that he was friendly to African American interests. But in 1906, a bunch of African American soldiers in Brownsville were arrested supposedly for rioting, and Roosevelt drummed them out of the military without pensions.
They were tribes, weren't they?
Yes, yes, and it was an awful situation, and Bill McDonald said he would never support Roosevelt again, and he didn't. I mean, and the Republican Party didn't really have very many good candidates in that era, but he refused to support Roosevelt.
Now, you mentioned early on that his only son died tragically, and I'm not sure I know that story. Tragically how?
Well, you will see newspaper articles, contemporary newspaper articles from the time that suggest, there was the suggestion that he was poisoned. And there was something else that people speculated about, but I was able to get the death certificate from District of Columbia, and I was also able to talk to a friend of mine who is a pulmonary specialist, and there was an autopsy. He died of a very virulent form of pneumonia, and keep in mind, he was a 19-year-old kid. And we know what 19-year-old kids are like. They don't always take care of their health, and they don't realize that they're as sick as maybe they think they are. And he got sick, what appeared to be one day, and by about 48 hours later, he was dead. And but the autopsy revealed that he had had this severe virulent chest infection, and my pulmonary friend said there are strains of pneumonia that viral pneumonia that can kill you within hours. So I don't believe there's really any, mystery to it or
You don't know if it was
conspiracy.
homicide. Okay.
Yeah, I think we can put conspiracy theories to the side.
Okay, and finally, Bill McDonald had a lot of wives, didn't he?
Yes. Shall I run through them real quickly? Okay. His first wife was named Alice Gibson. She was from Sumter County, Alabama. They divorced in 1895. She deserted him first, but came back at least once. His second wife was Maddie Helen Ezell, and I think Bill probably grew up with her. She would have been 7 or 8 years younger, but he knew her as a kid. Her father was a well-to-do carpenter and farmer in Kaufman County. They were married for 30 years. She died in 1926. Then he was married in fairly quick succession to I always have trouble, Olive Jimmy Cochran, who had married someone named Roy in about a year after his wife died, 1927.
Is that the one that the Jim Hotel was named for?
Yes, the Jim Hotel.
See, I
and
never
then she left him and within 6 months was married to somebody else. Then he married Vivian Crabb McDonald.
Number 5? Is that number 5?
That's number,
That's 4.
that's 4.
That's 4, okay.
Vivian is still alive. Vivian is still alive. She will be, I believe, 102 this year. She's a very lovely lady. She lives in Arizona. And then his final wife was May Pearl Grayson, and he was married to May Pearl from, 1936 or 37 till his death. So that was a long-lasting relationship.
Now, help me, because I mean, I take people out to the gravesite out of Trinity, and it's the tallest monument out there. Now, am I right, or just a myth, that that final wife said, no, we're not putting your name on this?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I need to,
Because it's not a tombstone directly for him.
no, and it's a curiosity. In fact, I've even had people tell me, no, they moved that big monolith and they put him under it. And I've talked to some people in the cemetery business and they go, no, he is right there beside it. In fact, I've found 2 different articles that say he was buried beside it. But he is, all the others have a little stone, granite headstone with their names, but he doesn't.
And quickly, where does he get the nickname Gooseneck?
Did we forget about that? That's a wonderful story. And I had the hardest time tracking this down because, Bill, I don't know, you know, everybody has memory lapses, and he was being asked about this 30 years after the incident. But the way Bundy records it is Stearicks was the man who gave him the name. Well, I couldn't find anyone by that name, but I finally figured it out. William Garrett Sterrett, Sterett, who was the Washington bureau chief for both, well, it's the Belo Corporation, which still exists. They own the Dallas Morning News and the Galveston Daily News. He went to the Republican National Convention in 1896 and, well, I'm not going to try to read that, but anyway, he said, there is a goose-necked Negro here who is as smart as a whip. The story says that he's got Ned Green's credentials in his pocket, and he won't let Green have them. Well, that was true, because Bill McDonald told Ned Green what to do. But anyway, within a year after Bill Sterrett wrote this, the gooseneck had been picked up by newspapers all over Texas, chiefly by his enemies at first, who thought this would be a great way to ridicule him. But it became so synonymous with that refusal of his to lay down and take no quarters when it came to the Lily Whites, that it became a point of pride for him, I think, very quickly. And he didn't, it stuck, and he didn't even seek to try to get rid of it.
All right.
So that's the story.
Let me just, we got to close. I see Rick is here. Rick, do you want to add a footnote to anything that's been said here today? I mean, you're the chief historians here.
No, I just, commendations to you all, and hopefully my book will come out eventually, which is a history of all of the black community in Fort Worth, down the road somewhere.
Yeah, Rick is working on, I've seen part of that manuscript. It's going to be neat. Join me in thanking Jan for a great job here today.